Всем привет, это проект Альфа.
Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman and you're watching live our diary with Alexey Arestovich. Alexey, hello. Good evening. I suggest we start with the review of the front. We have some mentions that military are sending messages from Pokrovsk about critical situation there, what is happening there. Commander of 108 Battalion Da Vinci Wolves, Feldman, and journalist Yuri Butusov also confirmed that. And Yuri is saying that situation is dire because of leadership and management problems on the front and inability of local leadership to organize the front, despite even having reserves thrown in that direction. Alexey, what do we know about Pokrovsk direction? Well, another point there is that military are really upset that the commander of that direction, Colonel, was given a Brigadier General rank recently and was awarded for his service. So that really angered and upset a lot of respondents on the ground. And yeah, you can see on a map that Russian troops are encircling the front on the left. And according to a lot of messages in the media, we failed to build fortification in this area. We have more in the west, but not in the south. And despite the fact that a lot of settlements were taken recently by pincer motion, so it should have been prepared in the south as well. But everything is as we usually see it. Russians are moving rather speedily there. Shevchenko, you can see it now painted on the red, as captured supposedly was a fortified settlement. We usually do not disclose anything, no secrets here, so we discuss what is already in the media. But yeah, we can see that the enemy very quickly occupied, if not the whole Shevchenko, but part of it. And people probably will correct us down in the comments that it might have been already taken. And you can see this is a tentacle moving around Pokrovsk on the bottom, so you might see eventually the other one above it, or depending upon their successes here, whether they will go further to south, you can see some arrows there, or more to the west, because on the west side here, this is the special coal mine that, if taken, will take away significant resources from half of the Ukrainian steel production and metallurgy, and will affect about 30% of Ukrainian budget if falls into Russian hands. But apparently nobody cares about it, besides the journalist Yuri Butusov. And according to some media, we already have Syrsky present on the ground there, but again, his presence there does not guarantee anything, and even if he is there, a situation that was being let go and lacked supervision for months probably would not be easy to remedy even for Napoleon, and Syrsky is not Napoleon. So what else is happening to the south? Kurakhovo. Here you can see even on the outline of the front, yeah, slightly more to the south, Uspenovka. Here they almost locked the corridor. Our troops are encircled, and we do not have a command to withdraw, according to what we hear. And they may get encircled there, they may get surrounded. Generally, if you look at the outline of the front, nothing changes. It's dual pincer movements everywhere, and enforcing our troops to leave the settlement by almost surrounding it and just pushing us out. And if you go further to the south or to the north, you can see a lot of pockets. If you go down south to Velika Novoselka, there are some heavy fights. We succeeded in pushing one township back from Russian ownership, and Novy Kamar, this one, and now they're attacking it again. What's important is that it's right next to one most important road that leads to the north. If they take it, they cut the supply line, and this becomes a very different story for our defense in the south. Now, a representative of our command on the Zaporizhzhya front also said that the enemy is preparing big offensive on Zaporizhzhya, on the southern front, and it is not surprising. Russian troops will be coordinating. For now, we can see there is some pressure there, but there's no advancement operations. And I think Russians are waiting for us to touch reserves to try to compensate their attacks elsewhere in the east. Near Pokrovsk, for example, they're holding before announcing any attacks south and waiting till the reserves will be tapped. Maybe they're not ready yet, but again, Russian troops are not known to be well preparing for offensive. They could have attacked even being not ready. But I think they're waiting for more developments to happen near Kurakhovo, more to the right, before they will activate more of the southern front. And there are no facts here. We usually use, in this case, because of the south, there are not too much official events happening. There are only rumors and publications in social media. Here there are some rumors about Russians preparing 300 boats to cross Dnieper River. Theoretically, it's reasonable. If they capture anything on the right bank, it will be possible for them to change that for the Kursk territory that Ukraine still holds in Russia proper. But for now, this is just rumors. It's not a fact. And many people are wondering how can they do that from the lower bank to the high bank under view of Ukrainian forces. And I pray they do not and they fail. But I would remind you that they crossed Oskol River in two places right in front of our troops, despite that they were on the lower bank and the river was controlled by Ukrainian forces. The level of preparation, the level of control of our troops very often is at so low that enemies can pull off very risky schemes that they would not even dream about a year or 2 years ago. Alexey, what does it tell us, that state of leadership and management on the front? Well, you think it tells us that there is a risk of a real front collapse? About a month ago, there were some discussions about it, but they somewhat calmed down since. Well, collapse is a category of a risk, but it's very poor to predict it, right? Like the collapse in Syria, who would be expecting that? So collapse may happen or may not happen in the next 2 to 3 months, because the troops are in a rather poor state and our situation continues to decline. For example, Pokrovsk direction, right? Right, they have Mordechov, one of the most successful Russian commanders, who took Mariupol and Avdiivka, commanding their troops there, right? But on the other hand, we have our commander-in-chief, our Syrsky there, we have some reserves that are dropped there. There is a mix of different troops and different units. There's a lot of attention on it. So you can see, however, what's happening. Nothing. So what's important is to keep an eye on this trend. When we used this word possible collapse about a month ago, when I said that if we'll continue in this fashion for several more months, there will be a collapse, that did not disappear. And if anything, it exacerbated as a risk. So what factors and what signs will tell us, Alexey, if the collapse is imminent or if it's going to happen? That's a real threat now. Any signs we should keep an eye on? And as a result of this collapse, I don't know, for 4 or 5 hours, Russians may be in some strange parts where we'd not even expect them to be. Well, technically, Nikolai, it's not possible for them to move too fast because the column speed, the military column on the road is maybe at 20-30 kilometers max top speed to go. So they would not go too far. And collapse implied here by maybe a couple of our detachments either surrendering or putting arms down or retreating and them taking their positions. But then there is a second line, there are some reserves, so it's not going to be like a full disappearing of the front in that area. It'll be them taking positions of the operative tactical level, like in Oskol when they crossed the river, they took company outpost, captured it, and they actually captured 2 and they supposedly were kicked out of the second one. But overall, you know, when they crossed from the lower bank to the higher bank, take some territory. This is a sign of severe deficiency in leadership or resources in that area. And now we already know they're building pontoon crossing over that river. So I would not be hopeful for us to fix these threats quickly. This is a very dire indicator. If the enemy is trying to cross the river from the lower bank to the higher bank, doesn't care about us being present, that implies that they see that there is no counteraction on our side happening to stop them. So, okay, if we take the direction of Kursk district and presence of armed forces of Ukraine in Kursk in Russia, on one hand, there is a small piece here of Russians attacking near Sumy district, and then there were some notes about positive changes in the controlled territory by the armed forces of Ukraine this week. So what's really happening? Do we need to pay attention to that part? Do we need to stay there, in your view? Well, you know my opinion. I was always for a quick raid and return. Maybe we could have done several raids like that along the front line, along the border. Depends upon what we want to do. But to capture and hold, this is political decision, and I do not think that political decision is adequate. It complicated the situation more, and I do not see concrete bonuses because of that. And if we're going to change territory for some other territory, well, the size of it was 1,200 square kilometers. That's 30 by 40 kilometers patch. How much can we change it for? Same patch somewhere? It doesn't really change much in our story. Now, Russians do not have enough forces there to cut us off. They're dropping some reserves to see if they can, but we'll be fighting. And apparently we have a lot of material supplies and rather good troops holding this patch because it has political significance. That's where our troops are holding rather well. Even though we've seen at times Russians capturing the drone operators and executing them and executing prisoners, that indicates that they sometimes manage to get behind the front lines and get to our softer spots. But for now we're holding, and let's see how it unfolds. So, Alexey, in terms of negotiations, is it really a good card to have in preparation for the future negotiations? Well, okay, Nikolai, this is a card, but of course Russia will be demanding Ukraine to leave the territory we occupied, and we can say, sure, let's change it for something. What do we change it for? Well, we know many times they did talk about the idea about Zaporizhzhya for Kursk nuclear power plant in Russia. Well, if we captured nuclear power plant, that would have been a different story. But here, what do we change? 30 by 40 kilometers for something that they captured? Yeah, they can tell us, sure, take it 30 by 40. Pick where. They will not give you anything important, but, you know, maybe for prisoners, that's another good option. So it created, I think, for us so huge geopolitical consequences that Putin actually got some cards in his quiver saying that as long as Ukraine is in Russian territory, we continue fighting. So that complicated the dialogue and that complicated the peace talks. Was it the right move if we're going for peace? If we were continuing to fight, sure. If there is no peace discussions, absolutely, that's a good move. But if we are about to sit down and negotiate, not sure. It would be good if the tactical actions would be matching suit with the overall strategy, and it's difficult to judge that if you don't know the bigger ideation. But if the bigger ideation is to sit down and strike peace, that's not the right move, probably. Alexey, attack on Bryansk, do you think this is additional action helping peace talks? No, this is the inertia of war. This doesn't help. We strike them near Bryansk, they'll probably throw another Arestovych or some other ICBM on our head somewhere, and we'll be screaming that you damn animals attacking our civilians. But given the experience we have between Ukraine and Russia, and given what both sides have done during the last 2.5 years of this war, 3 years almost. Yeah, it'll be a different scenario. How could de-escalation happen? We could talk about stopping attacking anywhere but the front line, right? Or anywhere further than 50 kilometers away from the front line to save civilians. And then perhaps freeze the front in some parts. This is a multi-step conversation that could have been happening in the format of those previous Minsk agreements and the like. But in any case, if one side or country is demonstrating goodwill, the actions that really piss off the other side are definitely not helping for peace, right? So today, for example, there was attacks on Bryansk and Taganrog, and we hit some of the oil refineries. And then the head of office of president comes out and says, yes, we will be sitting down and striking peace deals. Trump administration is getting ready to look into the peace process. Russia was talking about peace activities. And at the same time, Ukraine goes and hits Bryansk and other oil refineries and stuff. And we already see different Western media talking about Russians using Arestovych again on Ukraine. And yeah, they probably will. And if we're going to talk peace, we probably could have avoided this hit and being hit in retaliation. I feel deep antipathy. I understand these attempts to press the gas pedal when everybody is agreed to press the brake. I think this is not the right action. This is puny. Alexey, in your view, do you think these are signs of future decisions that are aimed to disrupt any negotiations in the future? Well, Syrsky promised us some counteroffensive recently, right? These actions do not support cooling down on the front. We just, I think, need to make a decision. Do we want to cool down the front and to start negotiating? Or do we not want to? And not want the negotiation process? Especially good it would be to solve it in light of today's statement of newly elected President in the United States, Trump, who said that right after inauguration he'll take all steps to stop this war. Right? He cannot be doing them from zero, right? You need to speed up to this process. So he probably is already working on that. And Russian side is already sending a sign that, yeah, we will review the plans. It doesn't mean they will adopt them, accept them, but at least they're ready to review. And that implies that they may consider that even before inauguration. So our behavior here is quite of a petty troublemaker. I think this is irresponsible politics. Alexey, tell how do we understand the signal related to NATO in this case? When General Secretary of NATO says that the West needs to help Ukraine to take a stronger position and Ukraine needs to hold off on peace talks with Russia until Western allies provide enough military aid. In his opinion, this will help Kiev to achieve better position for negotiations. Is NATO living some other life from all these processes? Yes, Nikolai, NATO is living a different life, and like any organization, they need to make some periodic statements to remind people of their existence. And this statement was going across and against everything happening. We can compare that with the statement by Trump, who said that I can leave NATO, I can take United States and leave NATO. So Rutte's statement did not go unnoticed, right? Everybody is trying to make some statement now. There is a game of words happening, and in this chaos, it's important to find a core process. And that's why I'm asking, our desire to converse with Russia from position of force without having resources. Resources are given by United States, some from Europe, but mostly United States. Rutte's desire to arm us to a position of power and the statement of President-elect Trump that he might pull out of NATO, that he might diminish aid to Ukraine as well. He, I think, was saying that in press, mentioned that that he might block money already dedicated to Ukraine. And yeah, Trump actually reacted to that. He said that we already gave too much money to Ukraine, and in one of his tweets he did mention that we're giving money to Ukraine, the money are being returned to Hunter Biden, and Hunter Biden gives money back to Biden. Do you like this scheme? And our bright politicians in Kiev, Brussels, and the other places. Simple question. How are you going to correlate with Trump's statements and his attempts to create certain project with his activity? Are you going to go against it? Good luck, but have you calculated the consequences? What if America will stop supporting Ukraine? What if Musk turns off Starlink, a future member of Trump administration in some capacity? Just shut down the Starlink. Where will your drones go? How do you manage your troops then? Starlink is the main means of communication in Ukraine, military communication in Ukraine, and many other things. This is called irresponsible politics, in my view. From psychological point of view, it's very infantile. It's like children who do not think further than one step ahead. I want a candy and I will eat it. Right now. Step 2, step 3, step 110, inaccessible. And what I see is very childish politics, irresponsible. Let's also, Alexey, discuss that if right now, before Trump's inauguration, solve all these questions, and one can determine the signals that need to be sent and position that needs to be occupied, then if we don't do that, then after Trump's inauguration, we may be facing such an unpredictable turbulence inside of which I don't think we are ready to find ourselves in. I don't think we are. Right, we are not ready and provoking by any means we can, apparently. Orban came out, he was talking to Putin recently, and he already came out and judged President Zelensky with his statement. And he is saying that he suggested Christmas peace, Christmas truce on the front for Ukraine and Russia, and complete exchange of prisoners. We're both Christians, the conflict is within the Christian civilization. Let's do a ceasefire on Christmas and exchange all prisoners. Pretty good suggestion, right? Especially given the coming Christmas. And he added that President Zelensky did not agree. Before that, there was a communication case that I reviewed, which was responded to by the Office of the President, not Zelensky himself. But they did say that, don't know, Trump is not exactly correct in his statement. We need to talk more with President Biden. So, however you spin it, those people who are responsible for communication in Zelensky's office, if it is not his direct orders, but at least those who are doing that, they are very diligently sending the following signals to the world politics. President Zelensky, the only participant in this war who does not want immediate ceasefire. If you look at the core of the statements, that's what it looks like. And that's what Orban recently accused Zelensky of. And I warned several days ago our viewers and readers that this is how it will be read, and this is how it will be presented. And I actually suggested how they should wrap their answer. That, I think, by the way, they heard me and they did exactly that. That first say that we are first for peace and ceasefire, and then write your suggestion. And they did it this time. But it does appear that the information politics in the president's office is carried out by several very different people. And this attack on Orban, who just came out and said that they're comparing him basically with Assad, and he is suggesting a ceasefire and the prisoner exchange. Right, before that we had some normalization of relations with Hungary. We went there and signed a few contracts, and then we do that slap in the face of Orban. I mean, you may not like him, but you don't have to attack him directly. And our communication is, very different, very torn. The messages are very omnidirectional, and one can deduce that the leadership is between different goalposts. And if being delicate, I would say their mood changes several times a day, and they're sending several different messages out. Or the leadership does know what they want, and they're sending certain signal, but there are some other forces that are providing communication coverage, and they inject their worldview into messages. And I'm not sure which scenario is better. But regardless, this confrontational rhetoric brings us to a trap, because it is built on confrontation with Trump and his administration. They're trying to mock him, trying to attack him, trying to say he is wrong. And look at the pro-government Telegram channels in Ukraine. And second, they're sending public disagreement signals with Trump's administration that is coming, and trying to present him as a very irresponsible politician. Trump said that, Trump comes out and gives a much larger number of victims, 300, 400,000 of victims of this war on the Ukrainian side. And they're not even talking about the ones who are missing. And Zelensky comes out and dispels that and says, no, the real number is well below 100,000. So I don't think it makes sense also for us to argue with everyone. Trump or Orban. Orban is actually presiding European Union organization right now. And somebody comes out and suggests a truce with no Oreshniks, no UAVs, no people dying on the front, and we disagreed. If that is a true statement, they'll be qualified only unilaterally by all people in Europe and the world, and we will find ourselves, as Ukraine, as a country, in a very disadvantageous position. If Russians take position now that, yes, we were ready to sign the ceasefire and to exchange prisoners of war, I don't know if they'll quickly take this position or find ways to do that, then the compass of heavy political responsibility is going to point directly at President Zelensky. I don't know if they calculate these steps and what do they rely upon making these statements, right? However many thousands of statements they make. All soldiers, all prisoners have mothers, have families. And Orban comes out and says, in 2 weeks they could be home. And President comes and says, no, we're not going to do it. These prisoners have friends in the army. There's a whole country that cares about them. And there are about, according to official data, 36 million. In reality, I think it's 24. But those millions are living now in Ukraine, and they're inspired by possible truce. And then Zelensky said, what, no? What about people more important than territory? We had these signals initially, right? What happened to them? I like simple questions. I want to ask a simple question here. If people are more important than territory, and even wider, if we poorly manage, poorly administer even existing territories, why are we wasting tens of thousands of people to occupy new or return what was occupied from us? Let's say you have a chessboard. You have 10 chess positions. 8 of them that you have very horrible administration. No freedoms, no nothing. And we want to take, 2, 3 more squares to administer them badly too? What for if we poorly administer what we have? I'm not even going to go deeper into this topic. Just for our viewers to think. Answer this question. Why do you want that? Mirror-like situation in Russia. They manage Russia so poorly internally. 50% of villages in Russia, of the world gas power, does not have gas. But yet they crawl around and try to pick more territory. What do you need that for, if you can barely manage what you have? Same story here. Let's waste tens of thousands of people for new territory while we cannot defend Pokrovsk. Let's try to capture or return some other parts of the front. Seems like a flawed logic. Alexey, I think we can elaborate on the meaning of this via the narrative, via examination of narrative that President's office presented recently. There have been a few more signals where the same signal about just world continually is being pushed by Zelensky office. So underlining the word just. And with consideration of what's happening now, that in Ukraine we do have very ineffective management and we want to spread it to the territories that need the occupation, what would be justice in this? What would be considered just in this story? We have huge numbers of losses. Of course, they're disagreed upon, but in any capacity, it is so huge that it is difficult to overestimate it, right? The loss of life, the destruction of townships, lost livelihoods. What is just? And should we even be talking about just in this case? Perhaps we can either bring up a decision that will lead us to a big wound that will exacerbate, or to ceasefire, stop it, and find a way to peace in the future. Well, Nikolai, here it is rather simple, I think. If you bring a category of just world, it would make sense to clarify what do you mean, right? Just, asterisk, just implies 1, 2, 3, 4. Because nobody talks exactly, as you mentioned, about what is just peace. For example, we have two fetishes here. Russia has the goals of their military operation. Nobody knows what they are right now. I would remind our listeners that in the first 2 months of this war, Russia, as well as I remember, 9 times, only 6 times in March, changed the goals of this special operation that they proclaimed. 6 times. In April, they added 3 more, or 4, even 4. And since the beginning, they reformulated it over 60 times. Because they have a meaning, the goals of this operation, and they're trying to fill it with whatever they see fit. Same thing on our side, we have just peace. What is it? Alike, on the west side, Ukraine needs to define what is peace, or what is its victory. And until it's strictly formulated, I would call it to be political charlatanism. And it's a move. You can pick some very heavy charged term. Usually near the just peace you can hear capitulation. And we should preclude it from happening, right? For those who didn't hear, we mentioned before that capitulation is disarmament of one of the warring parties. So in our case, we are not going to face that at any scenario. So just peace to prevent capitulation. How are you going to establish just categories in politics when you don't have justice inside your own country? There is no justice in Ukraine. Justice has been trampled and tortured in here, whatever topic you pick. Today we got a message that from Financial Times, by the way, that over 20 billion hryvnias were stolen from fortification construction. This is what is being reviewed in the framework of criminal prosecution. Not all of those cases have achieved the full status of criminal yet, but they're already on the way to. So, how dare you to steal money from the blood? You're making money on the blood of your soldiers. You're putting them in conditions where they knowingly will be defending your country in absent of very poor fortifications. So our soldiers are being killed by both, by Russians on the front and by our own bureaucrats internally. Another, banks today communicated that they are limiting transactions between the accounts of citizens. All right, an average fundraiser that we publish here under the stream, 300, 500,000 hryvnias. So a soldier needs to, under new regulation, needs to leave the front and go pay for that, withdraw cash and pay it somehow. Because he used to be able to just pay it with a card. And now banks will be blocking it illegally by violating the constitution. But they're blocking the opportunity for our soldiers to equip themselves. Government doesn't give enough, soldiers have to beg, and people, when they help them, the country forbids them to easily use the monies they fundraised. What justice are you talking about, right? With your stupid decisions, every new day you bring a new idiotic decision that makes the life of soldiers fighting for you on the front, dying for you on the front, more difficult. What justice, what just peace are you going to talk about? Listen, Alexey, it looks like that under just peace, I think we can understand peace on the terms of the office of President Zelensky, right? Summing it up. All right, Alexey, but can the peace be just if the conditions of only one side are fulfilled? Probably not, right? We had a curious stream with Sergei Datsuk and Yuri Romanenko last week on Friday. We've discussed the meaning of subjectivity, of being a subject. Sergei Datsuk said that he was at some intellectual event recently where they were looking for ways to flip the board, to make a move that will drastically change position in our favor, that would allow to outplay everybody who has plans for Ukraine and whose plans we do not like. They named 5 and didn't name one more, which I think is important. We should place the question not about the guarantees of security for Ukraine. This is topic number 2. We should put the question about safety guarantees for Russia. That would be a board flipped. This war was started because Russia did not feel itself secure. Russian leadership. Integration of NATO with Ukraine, penetration of Ukraine by NATO structures and non-NATO but Western, that they had to start the military operation. This is not my point of view. I disagree with that, but this is the position of Putin's administration, with which we are supposed to strike truce, right? We can laugh at this, we can not believe it, we can dispel it, however many times, we can give 500 arguments against it, but this is how they think. They plan and implement their government politics based on this point of view, and they're not going to change it. They're talking about security of Russia, how they understand it. This is what for they kill and die. The idea that captured the minds of masses becomes material force. We can be laughing at it, but it does have measurable force. 400,000 killed and wounded on the Ukrainian side. Numbers called by President Trump. The number given by President Zelensky was 13,000 more. Without missing, it was 413,000. Destroyed economy. If they capture the coal mine that we talked about, we'll lose 30% of GDP. We will lose 50% of metallurgy. We're paying real price. And you can keep laughing at your neighbor as long as you want, but remember, you're also laughing at the price we're paying for that. That's what they think. That's why people who think smarter, they were posting a question this way. How I would do it? I would call Moscow and said, comrades, I think the main question of what's happening is the question of security of Russia and guarantees for Russia. But, and moreover, I would say, I'm ready to sign agreement with you, based on which, under no circumstances, never there'll be any threat from territory of Ukraine for Russia. And that would open a window for normalization and ceasefire and achieving some sort of agreement. This is the key. And only after, when this opportunity, that window would be opened, then you can say, of course, you understand that such agreement cannot be unilateral, right? It would not be symmetrical to provide security for Russia from Ukraine and do not provide similar security for Ukraine from Russia. Such agreement needs to be bilateral. We do not threaten you, you do not threaten us. Let's discuss. And that would have been a way to enter a much more flexible diplomatic game. Otherwise, you're saying that Russia is giving us terms that are unacceptable, referring to July ultimatum of Putin with 4 districts of Ukraine belonging to Russia. And we continue to push unacceptable terms for them, they continue pushing unacceptable terms for us. Well, you know, life is a difficult thing, but we do have a key. Start talking about security of Russia and guarantees for them. And then add security of Ukraine, and then wider security for Eastern Europe, and even wider security for the whole European continent. But an opportunity to discuss European continent at large appears only after you address the core problem at the beginning of this war. Well, Alexey, And if we're talking about strikes from Ukraine onto the territory of Russia, on one hand, of course, we are at war, but I see the telegram from Kennan, whom we discussed here many times. He did mention that Kremlin and Russia, they always act based upon the exacerbated vision of their security threats. Oh, absolutely, Nikolai. They started several world wars from that point of view. Division of Poland, creating the buffer zone, Second World War with Germany, First World War, similar story. All that run to the Black Sea and 26 wars with Osman Turkish Empire for the Straits, incursion into Afghanistan in 1979. All these attempts to push the boundaries of Cold War and create different blocs around Soviet Union. All the agreements about non-changing borders after the Second World War. All the architecture of security contracts that were implemented in Europe. All the basis of Potsdam-Yalta system was created with one goal in mind: to maximally move the borders of conflict from the borders of their sovereign territory, or what they consider to be sovereign territory. And if you look at the borders of Russian Empire and Soviet Union, they were actually going along the mostly removed territories from the core of the country. Only Karpaty was probably the only slightly different position, with a small enclave that was changing hands about 20 times in the 20th century. So we can say here that our aggressive neighbors have one interesting point. Let's, abstract. They are red. They are red-haired. That's their peculiarity. So what options do we have? We can say we defend our holy right to be upset by the fact that they are red-haired. We want them to be blonde or dark-haired. That would be just neighborship. And they tell us back that we do not agree with that. And moreover, if you will continue using the word red in our direction, we will be attacking you with Oreshnik and using a lot of troops against you. And even if we strike truce now, but you will continue your encroachments, we will have another conflict. I would remind our viewers that Arabs tried to destroy Israel by, several big wars already. Given that Israelis have been destroying them in every war, Arabs undertook 5 attempts to get rid of Israel. So, how many attempts do you think Russia will make, if we do not solve the question of their security? I think it's a very important principle that needs to be discussed. And I'm saying there will be, even if we stop this war with Russia, there will be a second war with Russia, and then a third war, and then fourth, up until we either lose Ukraine or we figure out and post a question about the guarantees of security for Russia from Ukraine territory. Otherwise, they will continue their attacks. No NATO, nobody else will do nothing. And I'll tell you one more scary thing here that is also unpopular, but somebody needs to voice it. I will voice it. No serious security guarantees will be acquired by Ukraine from the world community. This whole war proves that. The only guarantee of security is joining NATO or European countries into the hot phase of war against Russia. If Russia attacked Ukraine, this is the only guarantee that can prevent this war from happening. And they will never go for it. Big, bold letters, never. They can fight with Russia for their territory. They can fight with Russia on some peripheral theaters like in Northern Ocean, defending some interests. But they will never fight for us on our front. And we had other guarantees, Budapest, Minsk I, Minsk II memorandums. None of those worked. And they already did not work. It doesn't make sense to reproduce that same situation. We have experiment. They've been fighting against us for 3 years already, with all these things signed before. And they have proved that, again, the reason for this war was the fact that they did not feel security from that side. So unless we find a way to address this matter of security, to give them the feeling of that security or get some guarantees of security for themselves, they will continue one or the other form of action that will affect Ukraine and that will provide them with that security. And hot war is already a proven fact. That's one of the options on the table. We're facing it for the third year at large and actually 10 years before that. So this is the real situation. Peacekeepers from Poland, from Britain, from France, none of them will come here full scale, full force. They'll never risk that. Right? Russia started the war with Ukraine so there would be no NATO, and then NATO comes in to fight. What if some provocateur will go and kill 20 French soldiers? Or what if somebody shoots more, of these foreign troops and starts a bigger fire? What, you start a third world war because of that? No guarantees for Ukraine. The only guarantee that will stop Russia is NATO forces fighting on the territory of Ukraine for Ukraine, which will never happen. They will fight for their territory, they will not fight for ours. Friends, please hear me. This is the key to that situation. The only real guarantee for security of Ukraine can be given by Russia. The West is incapable to guarantee our security. They can support us if they'll be around too. They will give us more munitions and resources. But according to certain polls, of course, not formal and not fully official, but if you just poll in Telegram channels around, 86% of soldiers fighting on the Ukrainian front, or at least over 50, they said the moment the war stops and the border opens, they will leave Ukraine. They will leave this super just country. How are we going to fight the second round with that? Russia will prepare, they'll draw conclusions, they always do, and we won't. Because our system is incapable to carry out these lessons as it is now. We're stealing our own fortification money. And you think that the system will not be stealing after the hot phase of this war, and they'll be preparing for war, while we are not doing it to save our lives during the time of war. 12% of what was ordered was built. Everything else is missing, even though government sent all the money. And you think this will not continue after the war? Well, perhaps it may change if, I won't point fingers here, if a certain person will become a president. Maybe we'll change that. Or at least we'll make a darndest attempt to do so. Otherwise, we'll be facing a second round in a worse situation than the first one. Russia will prepare for it and will be worse prepared and will lose it in a worse fashion than this one. Once again, nobody will give you real guarantees of security. These guarantees can come only from Moscow now. And the only way to acquire these guarantees is to post a question about security of Russia and guarantees from our side that will affirm that and find mechanisms of control that would not allow a real threat to be coming to and from Moscow. For example, limit long-range munitions use. And that's when you can discuss that, guys, you understand that Ukraine still sees ourselves as a European country. We're not matching our vectors with Russia. We can guarantee you that we are not going to attack you and will not join NATO. We'll stay a neutral country, as it was initially written in that Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, earlier version. And they can ask us, how can we guarantee that you do not attack Taganrog tomorrow? Here is the clause to that contract that we limit a certain range use of missiles. Both sides. Of course, you can have army, you can have training, but offensive tools are not going to be unlimited, right? And if we are limiting our use of missiles, you have to limit something on your side. Demilitarized zone, okay, we withdraw 100 kilometers from the border, you withdraw 100 kilometers from the border. Any violation is a reason for immediate committee of countries' guarantors to figure out what happened. There are a lot of mechanisms that can be used, but for that you need to create a capability to discuss them. And when we are stubborn and screaming like little kids, only just only just peace. And just peace is justice for Ukraine on the terms of Ukraine. From that position, this war will never be over, unless Trump will forcibly break these views. So why are we making these statements that we are ready to negotiate? Because the Office of the President is making statements that, yes, we need to stop this war in 25, but yet you're doing everything to make sure it doesn't. You're not addressing the core reasons. And if the reasons are not addressed, then the problem will repeat sooner or later. Everything is simple. Very simple, actually. And here is the key that opens that situation and creates the opportunity for truce and ceasefire and further normalization of our relations. Why nobody wants to pick it? It's obvious on our side. And it's another question that can be debated at large. Alexey, I wanted to finish with Kennan's telegram. Back then, the way I read it, and biographically, and all the references about the telegram, it was had such a doctrinal character that it became the reason for politics. Right, the whole politics of United States in regards to Soviet Union was based on this telegram. I understand it affected the countries of Western Europe too, right? The whole NATO, indeed. NATO and United States. Kennan's telegram was put in the basis of the US politics during the Cold War. And they actually had this position outlined there, that Russia is inadequate in understanding all threats around it. And they built a rather successful doctrine of Cold War based on this premise, which was rather quiet times, still resisting the encroachments of Soviet Union, and this strategy led to Soviet Union ultimately collapsing. This is what rational politics of the West led to, and why they're not doing it now, that's the second question. I think now it's more related to globalism at the moment. I think the politics of the West is getting more reasonable now, they're getting more sober. Ours is not. There are other countries like Finland. Finland fought with Soviet Union in the 40 and 44, lost both times, but still made them hurt both times and gave very little. And they signed a peace accord that was called Finlandization, a specific term. They took upon themselves to never be the enemy of Soviet Union, to never join anti-Soviet blocs, and voluntarily slapped anti-Soviet censorship. So no dissident magazines, movies, or publications could be surfaced in Finland. Economy was integrated. Half of Finnish weapons were Soviet Union weapons. Now, where is Soviet Union? There is no Soviet Union, right? Finland is a member of NATO and a successful country. This is how adults think. They think many steps ahead. Any politics, any government politics that is not reaching that level of understanding or planning for at least 20 or 30 years, I'm not even talking about 50 or 60, is at best populist and incapable. Now, when we are screaming that we're the most wounded and most hurt, and just peace is only when all our wants and needs are satisfied and all enemies are punished, we either do not understand or pretend to not understand the reasons and causes for this conflict. After the First World War, Kennan, for those who don't know, he was a special ambassador of the United States to Soviet Union. He worked in the embassy. And in 1946 or 47, he formulated this telegram, and after the Second World War, sorry, I misspoke. You can find it online. That person deeply understood Soviet Union and those times Russia. He was still alive in the 90s. He lived a very long, fulfillment life, and he was categorically against certain motions in the US politics. He was categorically against NATO spreading to the east after the Soviet Union collapse. He forewarned that it will cause actions by Russia, like the ones we're observing now. How many encroachments did we see from NATO or expansions to the east? Several? Right, 5. He was warning us like in our red hat example, that we have a red-headed neighbor, and the red-headed neighbor will do as such. And we're observing him doing as such. So what are we doing now? Continue to call him red? Or we start addressing it? And I want to outline that specifically when they'll be discussing what we talked about here. There'll be some of that pseudo-patriotic foam frothing in Ukraine that this is giving up our territories to Russia, this is capitulation, this is treason, meh. Dear friends, how should I put it? Nobody is afraid of Russia, but when there is a chance that a meteor will hit the ground and civilization will collapse, smart people will be creating anti-meteor service, which, by the way, Earth has. It has $400 billion, and they're observing the night sky and watching possible threats, trying to react if... And periodically, we get messages that there are big asteroids hurtling our way. I don't know if you know that story. Shoemaker, the astronomer, was a big fan of this story. It was the end of the 19th century, and people were telling him, this is mathematically negligible event. They calculated the probability. This is 0.0015. He said, yes, right, but the consequences of that are so horrible that multiplying that on a small probability creates a significant level of threat that needs attention. He went to Australia, he rented a vehicle there with his wife and was driving around. It was 1905 or something. And turning from around making a turn on the road somewhere, he collided with another vehicle and died. One of his classmates, or one of his students, rather, did the research statistical, what would be the probability of two cars in 1905 colliding on the road of Australia in the rural area. It was some minuscule probability, so he used that to show that this is a similar probability to this asteroid hitting the Earth. And yeah, now we have a multi-billion-dollar organization working to prevent it. So, similar story here. Or like a volcano, yeah? If you live next to a Krakatoa that explodes once in a while, you don't need to be afraid of it, but you need to make your life knowing these risks. Okay, if Kennan is not an authority for you, what is an authority? Or you just want to close your eyes and want childishly scream, I want it to be like I want to? Then there'll be a third war, fourth war, fifth war. Arabs losing to Israel fought conventionally 5 times. Russia winning this war, they already technically won by the number of territory they lost, territory acquired, how many people they lost, how many they acquired. They already won by these numbers. Do you think they will pause at starting another one, and then another one until they reach their goals? The minimal condition they want is to push us beyond Dnieper. This is a natural obstacle and the threat diminishes. But then there may be question about guarantees of security for Belarus, which they're also in a union state with Russia. And now you don't know behind which Dnieper do you want to hide, or hide behind Zakarpattia, right? And those of ours who scream that we never surrender, do they want Ukraine to be the size of Zakarpattia? I don't like Ukraine to be so small. I like Ukraine in the borders of 91, or at least on the demarcation line before this war. But constantly retreating under Russian blows and constantly destroyed economy and inability to build anything, ruin, regional disorganization. Central power only runs Kiev and then its gangs running districts. Is that the scenario we're going to if we continue this path? I don't appreciate it. Do you like it? Would you like to live in a country like this? Do you see how complex and difficult the meaning of the word just can be? End of first hour.